Jason Mink for old guys who like old comics. I'm joined by Mr. Scott, and today we're going to look at something absolutely fantastic. Aren't we, Mr. Scott?
Well, don't look at me. I'm a piece of plastic. I'm not even saying this. You're saying this.
And we're back. See? I told you we'd get a table. Let's get right to it. When I was a kid, my dad and I didn't really have a whole lot in common. That's not really so uncommon for dads and kids. There's usually a pretty significant generation gap. For my father and I, he grew up in the 1950s. I was a kid in the 1970s, so we came from very different worlds. Didn't really have a whole lot in common. But one area that we did mutually agree on was our enjoyment of Star Trek. The show was on in syndication in the mid-70s, so every night at dinner time my family would gather around the television. We would sit down and thrill the adventures of Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Mr. Scott. My dad was a bit of a gearhead, still is in fact, and Mr. Scott was his favorite character. Well, I suppose the Enterprise was his favorite character, really, but Scotty was the guy that he identified the most with. He seemed to really appreciate the fact that when the captain could call upon him, Mr. Scott could deliver. He was able to get his hands dirty, get in there up to the elbows, you know what I mean, get things working. And Dad was the same kind of guy. And Dad was pretty cool in as far as well, he didn't necessarily share all of my toy passions, but he made sure that I had the Star Trek crew. Mego released the original crew of the Enterprise in 1974. You had Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, Mr. Scott, as well as the Klingon. As far as it goes, like I said, my Dad was good about making sure that I had the crew of the Enterprise, but he also understood that you can't have the crew without something to get them around in. And since I've beaten around the bush plenty already, and the battery is probably dying at this point from all of the takes that we've attempted to do so far. Cheers. We'll get right to it. This is an unboxing video, and there's something in here that I haven't seen in a hell of a long time. I have a knife, but maybe we don't need that. Maybe we don't need to get all bladey with it. Yeah, I just rip the damn thing open, really. That's the most satisfying part of it, is doing it with your hands. And there she is. The Mego Star Trek USS Enterprise Playset. Looks pretty good, huh? No? What do you mean? What kid wouldn't be thrilled to have this plastic vinyl object? I know, it doesn't look like much, but once we open it, that's when the magic begins.
The Star Trek USS Enterprise gift set with command chair, console, 3 telescreen cards, and 5 Star Trek action figures. Place Mr. Spock or any Star Trek figure into the transporter room. Spin the control knob and press the button. Mr. Spock disappears. Pretend he's left the deck of the Enterprise for outer space adventure. You can capture the Klingon and bring him back to the Enterprise. Star Trek USS Enterprise gift set. Star Trek action figures also sold separately by Mego.
And here we are on board the Starship Enterprise. And it would appear as though Captain Kirk is getting ready to send Mr. Spock on an away mission.
Now, this transporter was available as part of this playset and was also sold separately back in the day. It has a very cool transporting action, which we will take a look at in a moment when we put Mr. Spock inside and beam him down. But before we do that, let's just slowly pan across and get a look at all this high-tech instrumentation. Now what we have is the captain's chair right here, comes included in a nice robin's egg blue, because I think that that's show consistent, right? We have a couple bar stools, we have a yellow computer, and right here these pieces are cardboard, and they pop on there. They're view screens. The set came with, pardon the glare, the set came with 3, and they're printed on either side, so you have 6 in total. This particular set only came with the 1, so it has 1 on that side, 1 on the other. But for now, we'll stick with the freaky plants. And as we pan across, we see some more instrumentation, and then we end up here in engineering, which is pretty cool. Maybe I'll shift the camera just a little bit. Pardon me if it's an abrupt transition, but you know how these things go. Now, the interesting thing about this set, one of them anyway, is it's made of cardboard. It's cardboard and laminated plastic. There's only a few accessories per se, you know. Once again, we have our computer, we have our stools, we have our chair, and we have our transporter here, but otherwise this was a carrying case essentially, and it served that function very well, because as opposed to just any old carrying case that you would toss your guys in, something that was shaped like Darth Vader's head or what have you, this was actually functional, because you could decide that you were heading towards Regula 4, pack your figures up in the case, close it up, and then go running across the neighborhood to wherever Regula 4 was. Unpack your case, pull your figures out, and have an adventure. We're about to send Mr. Spock down to the planet right now. Let's make that happen. We'll get the figures back in here now. The transporter is a simple but clever toy with 2 sides. You place the figure in the red side, spin the tab, press the green button, and Spock disappears. There's a door on the opposite side to beam him out or switch with another figure. A transporter accident has led to Dr. McCoy attempting to bring Spock back, but surprise! Instead it's the Gorn. Captain Kirk does his best to reason with the savage creature, while McCoy takes readings, and Scotty wishes he was back with his whiskey and engineering. Ah, but Mr. Spock has returned. A Vulcan nerve pinch takes out the Gorn, and the crew speeds off to their next adventure. Regula 5? The Mego Enterprise provided me with hours of fun as a kid. Hell, I may have even seen my dad playing with it a time or two. Is it a hunk of cheap plastic and laminated cardboard? Sure. But it's also another thread in the brightly colored tapestry of memory, a gift given that transcended any personal differences or generational gaps, and allowed 2 disparate individuals a chance to share something they both found special. This one's for you, Dad. For the Old Guys Who Like Old Comics Network, I'm Jason Mink. Thanks for watching.
Mego presents the Star Trek action figures featuring the crew of the Enterprise. Captain James T. Kirk, their fearless leader. Dr. Bones McCoy, caring for the health of the Enterprise crew. Scotty, the chief engineer, in charge of the transporter room. Mr. Spock, the Vulcan, second in command. And the Klingon, enemy of the Star Trek crew. Star Trek action figures, complete with accessories shown, each sold separately from Mego.